Fellow Ghanaians, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us on Upfront on the Joy News channel. It's a Thursday evening, the third day of August 2023, and I know for many of you are excited about the fact that tomorrow is a holiday. But of course, in Parliament, before it rises today, lots of issues happening. Yes, we know that the minority has had a motion accepted by the Speaker of Parliament to get the Finance Minister to actually brief Parliament on the domestic debt exchange program. Lots of issues happening also about the Bank of Ghana, the minority not happy with a loss of some 60.8 billion. So these are issues happening in Ghana's Parliament. But I know there are many of you also who become concerned about the Auditor General's report, particularly the report on public corporations, boards of institutions in this country. Now, you've been concerned because of the irregularities in there. 15 billion Ghana cedis. Now, just picture this, and I know there are many of you who like figures. So, 15 billion Ghana cedis worth of irregularities. Now, we're told by the Auditor General that some 99% of this amount can be recovered. 47 million of it cannot be recovered. And I'll be sharing with you shortly a breakdown of the irregularities for the year ending 31st December 2022, majority of which relate to outstanding debts and non-recovery of loans. And as we get into the discussion, you would find out that, these are institutions, intergovernment institutions that are owing each other. So you would have, for instance, the Electricity Company of Ghana owing the Power Authority. But also, there are questions about how we've performed over the period. Now, let me just share with you, for instance, these figures from the 2022 year, ending 31st December 2022. So if you look at it critically, for instance, you realize that in 2022, outstanding debtors' loans which are recoverable amount to some 14,964,300,230. Okay, just keep that money in mind. Then you have cash irregularities amounting to 23,513,000, with payroll irregularities totaling 11,486,154. Procurement irregularities amount to 42,710,000, tax irregularities 12,856,000, contract irregularities 4,574,000. But that's not all, because if you take a critical look at that same report, it tells you how poorly we fared from 2018 to 2022. Now, in 2018, we had a total irregularities of 3,007,258,924. Now, that gets to 5,468,000,000 in 2019. It increases, by more than 100% to 12,856,172,000 in 2020. Then further increases to 17,483,000,000 in 2021. And then in 2022, we see a reduction, but still at 15,059,000,000. This evening on our front, we want to understand a thing or two. We want to understand why we continuously engage in these irregularities. And mind you, I said irregularities, and we'll explain that shortly. And we're joined by Dr. Valentin Mensah, who is a chartered accountant. He's an auditing expert. He's the managing partner of CBS. Dr. Valentin Mensah, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you're doing very well this evening.
Yeah, good evening, Winston. I'm doing very well, thanks. And good evening to your viewers.
Great. So I know that in the past you've had, some concerns with the Auditor General, particularly when it comes to, how the Auditor General captures irregularities and the perceptions they create. Does this particular audit settle those concerns that you've had in the past? So we can move into the details of it now.
Okay, I would say that this is a very big step in the right direction as to the explanation of irregularities and losses. And you can see that in the report. they indicate when the irregularities do not connote losses, so that people will not be misled into equating the amount stated as irregularities as the same as corruption. Because last year, when we communicated to the external world that there was corruption to the tune of 17 billion, it didn't help the economy or the currency. That's why I made the efforts to clarify that all the irregularities were not due to corruption. And this year, they've done a very good job. And I can see why no media house has mentioned that the 15 billion is due to corruption. But then what we need to do is to ask why 15 billion only came from about 6 ministries. Mm-hmm. And particularly the Ministry of Energy accounted for almost all the recoverables. So, and then we see that the other irregularities have diminished. Does it indicate that the scope of work are reduced in 2022 as compared to 2021? Because cash irregularities, for example, the amount for an audit of 113 institutions is a bit worrying, because it tells us that there's been a significant improvement in internal controls and the cash irregularities, where most of the losses always emanate. So if you are only looking at 43 million, then we need to know whether it reflects in the improvement in the internal controls or the coverage of work was not as extensive as last year's. Mm. But apart from that, I can see that the Auditor General has done a lot of work, and especially in the summary to explain the work done, and also as to even including the list of audit firms that participated in the audit. Mm. So that was a concern that the Auditor General couldn't do it all and couldn't even audit the companies, the state-owned companies. So now the Auditor General has contracted the audit firms to do so, which is a big step in the right direction.
Great. So let's get into some of the specifics. And you started by talking about, we are needing to ask ourselves questions, particularly in relation to the Ministry of Energy, where majority of these issues are. For instance, you're looking at, the document, you realize that of the $515 million recoverables from the Bui Power Authority, ECG alone owes the Bui Power Authority some $509 million. Now, what's your concern with one ministry having majority, in fact, about 90% of the recoverables?
Thank you, Winston. I think it's a reflection of what pertains in the total economy, because with the IPP as well. So the energy sector is burdened with a lot of debt. And the ECG, based on how it has been operated, we can see that with the new management, there's been significant efforts in debt collection. And if this is sustained, then the power producers like Bui and others will be paid. But this debt accumulated because of the fact that ECG wasn't able to collect its debt. And that is a significant, it's a problem that would have to address in most of the state-owned enterprises, because the job is not finished or the sale is not completed until the receivable is collected. That is an aspect of management that we need to drive home to most managers or senior managers in this country. That as soon as you are engaged in sale activity. Pain stops when you've collected the receivable. So you see most organizations being run, but the receivables are always accumulating. And that is what is reflected here. If you have more than 99% of your irregularity in receivables, it reflects that the managers are not collecting. But the PFM Act requires even the directors to collect all debts. So it's a serious irregularity that has to be worked on to resolve.
Now, in working on this serious irregularity which you've identified, I mean, let's get to the specifics. How do we work on this? Because look, if you look at the 2021, 2020, we seem to have a lot of, outstanding monies that have not been collected. You say it's serious. You say the sale is not complete without the collection of the receivables. So how do we get them? How do we deal with that?
It comes to enforcement and then performance evaluation.
Hey, I'm driving. I joined the new Dunkin' Rewards program, and today's the day I'm going to use my points on a medium iced latte and a couple of chocolate frosted donuts.
Here you go, and thanks for being a rewards member.
And now I'm using those chocolate frosted donuts, kids, to get a few sweet, sweet, blissful minutes of beautiful relief from the never-ending onslaught of backseat bickering.
Join new Dunkin' Rewards today. Join new Dunkin' Rewards today. Save them, stack them, use them how you want. America runs on Dunkin'. Terms apply.
So as I said, we have it in the PFM Act that at the end of the year, management and directors should ensure that all debts are collected. So here you have one of the organizations, I think it's NETCO. The Auditor General mentioned that some of the debt is dated more than 4 years, or between 4 years. So how could that happen? So that may not only be to government institutions. So if you have deceased people and businesses that do not exist, that means there are losses. That it's a loss to the state. And that is where I expected the Auditor General to have gone further. Or if you indicate 4 years, that is when the section 1877 as to surcharging and disallowing comes in. Because you yourself, you know that 4 years is it's a long time to collect debts. And some people may have gone out of business, or some people may have passed away. So we need to do further work.
Okay. Well, except that in this case, you're looking at the Electricity Company of Ghana, which is still in business. And so if some of their debts are over 4 years, you'd expect that they will pay these debts. But the reality is the question I'm about to ask you. Now, we've had these debts for between 1 to 4 years. We have a cash waterfall mechanism, which is supposed to aid in the collection of these monies. That is not happening. And I mean, at times that we find ourselves in, realistically, do you foresee these monies being collected?
That is $1 million question. And especially with NETCO. With NETCO, I am not very sure that all can be collected. And then when it comes to the state-owned enterprises, most of them are also cash-strapped.
Okay.
Collection of the debts, it may be contra, either the institutions engaging the Ministry of Finance to arrange a form of contract. Otherwise, it will be difficult for most of the institutions to settle that debt. So if you have...
Yes, go ahead, I'm listening.
So if you have, for example, ECG owing more than $500 million, how long will it take for ECG to settle B Power? If B Power needs that money for its working capital. And it has to also run its operations. So how long is it? Are they going to wait for collect 25% every year? And even if they do, would that assist that business? So
okay.
This debt affects the life or the operations of most of these government institutions.
And talking about the NEDCO situation, you're looking at, the company's receivables. That's about 1.4 billion Ghana cedis. And that's from customers. Dr. Mensah, these are customers who have consumed electricity. So, shouldn't somebody be held responsible in ensuring that these customers pay their bills to NEDCO?
Thank you, Winston. Okay, so NEDCO, as the name applies, it's for the northern parts of the country.
Yes.
Okay, so we are in this country. There's been some political, how would I say, as to whether it's possible to disconnect power from certain areas, especially when it comes to period of elections. So if it's considered that those areas are relatively poor, it's considered social to supply them with power, even if they are not paying. And this could be debts that have been accumulated over time, as the Auditor General is saying, 4 years. So holding one person to account may be a problem. But I think at the end of the day, if the Public Financial Management Act is enforced, then the responsible officials will know that they can be held responsible. So there should be a balancing act, even if the government or the incumbent wants you to continue supplying power. If the customers are not paying, you also have to look at your back and then ensure that you collect the debt, otherwise you'll be held responsible. So it's a matter of enforcement of the provisions we have.
And talking about enforcement of the provisions we have, I mean, you started by talking about surcharging. Now, that's something that we actually saw in the past. I mean, we've had instances where Yabdomalevo, for instance, would surcharge. It doesn't look like that's part of, this Auditor General. It says, make sure you recover. There are no disallowances and surcharges. I mean, what do you make of that particular situation?
Okay, thank you for that question too. Yes, I think, as I said last year, before you can surcharge, you have to do further work. So, for example, there's recoverables or receivables that's indicated here. If you want to surcharge someone, or maybe, for example, the person in charge of NEDCO, you have to do further work to identify whether there was anything fraudulent, whether there was a breach of duty, and then negligence. Then you can hold someone responsible. But if you just identify the irregularity, you don't know who to allocate the responsibility to. So at that stage, you cannot surcharge. So the surcharge requires further work.
But shouldn't that be the way to go? I mean, if you're auditing, for instance, shouldn't you be finding out whether the losses that you've incurred as a result of somebody's negligent, all of that? Must you just look at it, present it, and walk away? Should that be the way to go?
Yeah, no, that is not what the Constitution requires the Auditor General to do. So the 1875 requires the Auditor General to submit the reports and then indicate if there are irregularities. So an Auditor General may just stop there, as we have now. But then the 1877B requires the Auditor General to surcharge and disallow expenditures that are irregular.
Yes.
And that is where we are still facing the challenge. So what I'm trying to say is that now this is a step that we've had some more information and clarification on financial irregularities. Now we have to make more efforts on the surcharging. And that is where we expect the audit service or the Auditor General to conduct more investigations. But then the time factor is also a problem. You see, you have the deadline of June to submit the report to Parliament. Most of the accounts may not be ready in time. So maybe March, April. And the time that the auditor is able to put everything together or enough time to conduct further investigation. And that is what we need to look at, how to accommodate that further investigation so that the
Dr. Valentin Mensah, are we not making excuses for the Auditor General? Because we've seen it before. We've seen it happening before. Where entities were, persons were surcharged. So, I mean, let me give you a typical example. For instance, in paragraph 68, which says, we noted that Madam Asabia Bampo, who was initially employed on contract basis, continued to receive a double salary as a contract staff and as a permanent staff, which led to an overpayment of 66,600 cedis. We recommend that management should ensure the stoppage of the contract salary payment and the amount of 66,600 recovered from her. Now, Dr. Valentin Mensah, the principal spending officer of that entity, and this is the Public Procurement Authority, should ensure a validation of everybody who's supposed to be paid. How is it possible that a contract staff is also paid as a permanent staff and the entity loses 66,000 Ghana cedis? And all we are told is that make sure you recover it. It should be somebody's responsibility, shouldn't it?
I agree with you entirely. This I would consider this as a low-hanging fruit for the Auditor General. That surcharge should have taken place.
But this is not the first time. Yeah, but this is not the first time the Auditor General has done that. Last year also, when he submitted the report, he didn't surcharge. And this is something that is being, a position of law. This is a position of law. So, since you are in the sector, I just want to understand, maybe in your conversations you probably have, information we do not have. What is the difficulty? Why is the Auditor General unable to surcharge?
Okay, thank you, Winston. As I said earlier, you need to be able to attribute someone. So, and the three, whether it was done fraudulently, and then whether there was negligence, and then breach of duty. So that establishing that may require further work. And once you even commence the investigation, you have to gather adequate evidence to support that surcharge. Because if it's the person appeals against that surcharge, you would have to go and face the courts, face the person in courts to be able to prove that the person was accountable. And that's in the past with Mr. Domlevo, we had some few misses in courts that may discourage an auditor general if he doesn't have sufficient evidence.
Yeah, but you're looking, okay, so this point that you make is true. But the question is, if you are actually conducting an audit, part of it also is to find out whether monies can be recovered and whether people actually were negligent or there was a breach of duty. And so those persons should be held accountable. Yes, you can argue that there may not be time, but there are certain cases where the evidence abounds or the evidence could be obvious. Shouldn't we then take advantage and get person surcharge so that at least we know? So this is it. Management has been advised to recover the money. They will come to the Public Accounts Committee. They ask these questions. Oh, we are in the process of recovering the money. And that's the end of it. So here we are. We know that in 2021, there were, monies that we should have been returned. Just last month, we were told of how some 10 million, I'm sure you may have read that, 10 million has been paid into the Auditor General's recovery account. That's 10 million Ghana cedis. Just 10 million Ghana cedis. Clearly, you would agree that there should be no excuse in the Auditor General's inability to surcharge. That responsibility is to make sure that if somebody doesn't do the right thing, you probe further to find out if it was a result of negligence, a breach of duty, and then you surcharge.
Yeah, thank you, Winston. I think now, as I said, this is a step in the right direction. At least, if we are able to contain the receivables, institutional receivables, then we can focus on the other irregularities that result into losses. And then, as you are doing, you raise questions as to why he hasn't surcharged the specific irregularity when it's so obvious that the evidence abounds. And that is all, it's a collective effort that we have to make to ensure that the right thing is done.
But let's look at another issue. We have instances where, some of these entities invested in financial institutions that have been collapsed, for instance, and they're being advised, to try and retrieve monies. Realistically, is that a possibility?
Okay, if it's the capital asset management institution, we know that through SEC's efforts, a percentage was paid. The government was going to pay the rest was in November last year, but nothing happened. So there's a possibility of recovery, but we don't know it yet. And now in this situation that we find ourselves, we don't know if it will be in the near future. So the government set up the amalgamated fund and then asked the depositors approval or acceptance to deposit the money in the amalgamated fund. And then they will be repaid in November last year, but it didn't happen.
Okay, so let's broaden the conversation now. I mean, you find a lot of these cases in there. You have, people going on leave, and then, they have study leave. People are actually on leave, and they're still receiving over, allowances. Okay, they're receiving allowances which are for, persons who work overtime, and these are issues that. But let's broaden the conversation now and find out, why do we have so many irregularities within our public sector? Why is that the case?
I think we should go back again to the lack of enforcement, especially in the public sector, because people see that as a secure job for most people, and it's so difficult to even dismiss someone in the public sector. So most of the managers, I'm not making excuses for anybody, but it's assumed that it's difficult to miss someone. So the sanctions are not meted out to people as they are done in the private sector. And that leads to such behavior where people are not carrying out their responsibilities as expected, and they are still in their positions. So most of the things that would have sent a lot of people home occur in the public sector without the appropriate sanctions. And that is why we have situations like this. So as you were saying, if you have an accountant who's running a payroll and a person has left the organization and the ex-employee is still being paid for years or even months, in a private sector organization, when that is detected, that would be a serious sanction meted to that person. But people do it, and they're still in their jobs. So it does not serve as a deterrent for people until we start sanctioning people in the public sector. We would continue to have these problems.
I mean, as one who's audited firms yourself, I just want to understand something. Is it your view that the public sector in Ghana is become more like a hub for corruption?
This is a difficult question to answer. But then, like I said, the corruption, we have an equation. We have monitoring and then accountability. Okay, so if those are not being done, then you encourage corruption. Things have to be so transparent. And then there should be continuous monitoring and then accountability. So if you have a situation where those are not in existence, then you will have corruption. So it could be that some public sector institutions are run at low corruption, but then you may have others that have the environment set for corruption because they lack those constraints or limitations.
Would you say that the Ghanaian generally is corrupt, and like Dr. Tonedu would say, you have corruption in the genes of the Ghanaian?
Okay. It's an interesting question. Okay. I've always known that a human being is adventurous. And that is why we have internal checks. So I always give the example when that I learned in the UK, that if you meet a couple in the UK, they work on their mortgage, they buy their house, they run their joint account, and the lady controls the accounts. And studying them, I see that regulates the men as well. So, like most of us are free here because our ladies will not agree to joint accounts. But in the UK, you even have expatriates whose accounts are being regulated at home. And with that, they know most of the things you do. And that is what I call internal check. So the husband checks the wife checks the husband. And so the room to go out of line is quite limited. So the internal checks, like we say, internal controls, internal checks. If people are not being checked, then there will be corruption. And that's when it comes to the societal level, it will be the cultural values in our culture that may not be solving the problem of corruption. Because we have certain cultural values, like our cultural value of collectivism or in-group or extended family, which can be also interpreted as party members and others. So when there's a problem, you have to begin by considering whether the person is your in-group or your out-group before you criticize or even sanction the person. So, for example, if your brother or your party member does something, you cannot sanction like you sanction somebody out of your group. That cultural value, most developing countries work with that and change it or find ways of mitigating that value. And we have Singapore that came with the value of honesty. And they began with a zero tolerance for corruption. And they had to consider that value as well, whether you are a party member or an executive. And especially the top executives had to be sanctioned, whether there was any, even there were cases where top executives went on leave and there was suspicion of corruption, they had to be sacked. So it's the values that may facilitate corruption. It's not in the blood. So the culture has to solve problems. That is what culture is for.
Okay.
To solve the problem of relationship with other people or the environment or even the state. So if the culture is not preventing that, then we have a problem with our culture.
When we return after these messages, and this evening, I'm joined by Dr. Valentine Mensah. When we return after these messages, we'll look at, in the board themselves. I mean, there's been lots of studies about how, audit committees are able to help institute internal control. So you ask the question, what's become of these public boards and their audit committees? Don't they see these things happening? What have they been doing? Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages.
Hello, my name is Abeku Agri Santana. If there's anything that makes my life so easy, it is my bank. I love hanging out with my boys at our usual fufu joint. But even without cash, we still dey chop better with EcoBank Mobile. No matter the time of day, my bank helps me stay in touch with my beautiful wife whenever she's away. And when my beautiful wife is in town, She never misses out on her favorite TV shows because I'm able to pay up all my TV subscriptions from the comfort of my mobile phone. Whenever she has to get groceries too, my bank makes it cashless and convenient. And the part my wife loves the most is when my bank makes it possible and easy for her to shop from any part of the world without moving.
Welcome to the smart world of EcoBank. Download EcoBank Mobile from Google Play Store or the App Store and discover the smart way to bank. EcoBank, the Pan-African Bank.
Neffy, it's my calipo inside the fridge. Don't touch it, okay? Fifi, it's my calipo inside the fridge. Don't touch it, okay?
Don't worry, darling. I won't touch your calipo, okay?
Okay.
Papa. Should I listen for you?
It's okay, Grandma. You can drink it all.
Oh, Kofi. I've brought plenty for you. You know that.
Calipo, the natural fruit juice drink. This advertisement has been vetted and approved by the FDA.
It was barely a year ago when I sat in this very hall to witness the 2021 Distinction Awards. I watched with awe and admiration the honor and prestige conferred upon the then awardees. They had braved all the odds to make it to the top. I wondered if I could ever achieve such a feat. However, I was motivated and I determined to make it a reality.
The WAEC Distinction Awards 2022, showing this Sunday on 6th August 2023 at 6 p.m. only on Joy News.
Welcome back, and thank you very much for joining us on Upfront tonight. And tonight we're reviewing the Auditor General's report on public corporations, boards, and institutions. And we're joined by Dr. Valentin Mensah, who is a chartered accountant. He is also an auditor. So, yes, Dr. Mensah, before the break, I was talking about, these audit committees. I mean, lots of research indicating how the audit committees are supposed to enhance internal controls, good governance, and by extension, a prevention of irregularities. Why these irregularities when these boards are in place?
Thank you very much, Winston. That's a very good question. Okay, so first of all, we want to know when the audit committees were commissioned in most of these organizations. We have late commissioning of audit committees. Secondly, for the audit committee to be effective, you also need an effective internal auditor. Because the audit committee would have to work based on the information provided by the internal auditor. And most of these institutions may not have an internal auditor with let's say, that level of independence in court. So you may have situations whereby the audit committee may not be receiving the information that would have been expected. And that may impact on the effectiveness of the audit committee. I can also say that it also depends on the team, the audit committee, the chair, audit committee chair. There's happen to be a chair of 2 audit committees, and it's not the easiest job in the world because you need to think ahead. You have to be on top of internal controls and then risk. So you need to think ahead and identify what may go wrong. And then on top of that, you need to look at the financial statements and then ensure compliance, the regulations and other matters. So when you are a chair of audit committee, a lot rests on your shoulders. And if you do not rise up to that expectation, that can also be a problem. And if you even do even if you are up to your task, then the internal auditor is not effective. You can even help the internal auditor. In my past career, I had a very good audit committee chair who helped me a lot to become more effective internal auditor by introducing me to certain principles and then methodologies, which really helped. So the audit committee chair has to work closely with the internal auditor to ensure that most of the areas are covered. But if they don't have that good relationship, it can also impact their effectiveness. And the entity itself, you even have some boards that are not that effective because of the head of the entity. Because we have a situation where most of the heads are appointed. They are political appointments. And the board members are also politically appointed.
Okay.
So how, when they go there, who is responsible to whom? That is the I think what we have in most of the public sector institutions.
It looks like we have a long way to go then.
No, if we start doing things right, we don't have a long way to go. We have all the institutions that we need to get us to do the right things, but they are not working for some reason.
And that's and is that not the beginning of the problem? Because if they are not working, then how sure are you that we don't have a long way?
For example, I always rely on online reports because I want to do a lot of research online, like the Auditor General, because I know whenever I go there, I see the reports.
Okay.
But I cannot say the same for Shraj. Now, you don't even have 2021, 2022 reports. And as I was talking about accountability, for the citizen, they need the information to hold the officials accountable. And it's the duty of the citizen. And the citizen can only get that information from an institution like Shraj. So if for 2 years the citizen has not received that information, can you blame the citizen for not participating as politically or holding the officials accountable? Because that's how democracy works. The citizens are the principal and the agents are the officials. The principal has to monitor the agent to ensure the agent is doing the right thing or the agent has the interest of the principal. But if the principal does not get the information, anything that the agent does goes. So if an institution is supposed to provide the information and it's not doing so, we have the media to go after them.
Okay.
Now, I think you've done so much with the Auditor General, and that is why I say it's a step in the right direction. The special prosecutor is also doing well. We hear a lot about Yoko as well. But then Shraj should raise his game so that we can have all the institutions working in the provision of the necessary information to the citizens. And once we have that, then things will fall into place.
Okay. Well, Dr. Valentin Mensah, thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. We're glad that you made time to speak with us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. On behalf of the team, thank you very, very much for joining us. My name is Winston Amadou. Have a lovely evening. Coming up is Joy News Prime.